He loves you deeply, but if you look closely, his actions don't match his feelings, and the reason is not betrayal, not indifference, but something far more unsettling, a conflict within him that he cannot fully control. There is a peculiar phenomenon in human psychology where a person can feel something with absolute intensity yet behave in complete contradiction to it. Not because the feeling is weak, but because it is overwhelming. When someone carries unprocessed emotions, unresolved fears, or fragments of past experiences buried in the unconscious, love does not emerge in a pure and direct form. It becomes distorted, interrupted, complicated. So what you are witnessing is not the absence of love. It is love filtered through confusion, fear, and inner division. Love can exist alongside internal conflict because the human psyche is not a unified system operating with a single consistent intention. It is layered, often divided between conscious desires and unconscious material that has not been fully processed or integrated. A person may consciously recognize genuine affection, attachment, and emotional significance towards someone, yet simultaneously carry unconscious fears, defenses, or past imprints that resist that very closeness. These opposing forces do not cancel each other out. They operate in parallel, creating a tension that manifests as inconsistent behavior. At a deeper level, love activates vulnerability, and vulnerability exposes unresolved psychological content. If earlier experiences have associated intimacy with pain, rejection, or loss of control, the psyche builds protective mechanisms to avoid repeating that discomfort. These mechanisms do not eliminate the capacity to love. Instead, they interfere with its expression. As a result, the individual feels drawn toward connection while also experiencing an equally strong impulse to withdraw, creating a push-pull dynamic that can appear confusing or contradictory from the outside. This coexistence is further complicated by the fact that much of this conflict operates below conscious awareness. The person is not deliberately choosing inconsistency. Rather, they are being influenced by internal patterns that shape perception, emotion, and reaction in real time. Love, in this context, becomes entangled with defense systems, making it difficult for the individual to act in alignment with what they genuinely feel. What emerges is not a lack of sincerity, but a lack of internal coherence, where emotional truth is present yet fragmented by unresolved inner divisions. Emotional repression creates behavioral inconsistency because what is consciously suppressed does not disappear. It continues to operate beneath awareness, influencing reactions in indirect and often contradictory ways. When a person actively avoids acknowledging certain emotions, whether fear, attachment, insecurity, or desire, those emotions are pushed into the unconscious, where they remain active but unregulated. The conscious mind may attempt to maintain control, presenting a composed, detached, or rational exterior, while the unconscious simultaneously drives impulses that contradict that surface presentation. This division produces a lack of alignment between what is felt and what is expressed. A person may experience genuine affection or emotional pull towards someone. Yet because that feeling is associated with discomfort or vulnerability, they suppress its conscious acknowledgement. However, suppression does not neutralize the emotional charge. It only removes it from direct awareness. As a result, the feeling resurfaces in fragmented forms, through sudden closeness, unexplained distance, mixed signals, or shifts in tone that seem disproportionate to the situation. The inconsistency arises because the individual is effectively operating from two systems at once: a controlled, conscious identity that seeks stability and predictability, and an unconscious layer that continues to push for expression. These systems are not coordinated, so behavior becomes erratic. One moment reflects the authentic emotional state, while the next reflects the defensive structure designed to contain it. Over time, this internal imbalance intensifies because the energy required to maintain repression increases as emotional pressure builds. The more significant the suppressed feeling, the more disruptive its indirect expressions become. What appears externally as confusion or unpredictability is, internally, a struggle to manage emotions that have not been fully acknowledged or integrated into conscious awareness. Fear of vulnerability often masks genuine attachment because the experience of caring deeply for someone inherently reduces psychological defenses. To feel attached is to become exposed to uncertainty, rejection, and loss of control, all of which the mind is conditioned to avoid if it has previously associated them with emotional pain. When such associations exist, the psyche develops protective strategies that operate automatically, discouraging openness even when the desire for connection is strong. This creates a paradox where the presence of real attachment intensifies the very defenses that conceal it. The individual may not consciously identify their reactions as fear. Instead, they experience discomfort, hesitation, or an urge to maintain distance at critical moments of closeness. These responses are not reflections of indifference, but are attempts to preserve emotional stability by avoiding situations that feel psychologically risky. The deeper the attachment, the greater the perceived risk, and consequently, the stronger the defensive response. In practice, this dynamic manifests as guarded behavior, emotional withdrawal, or inconsistent communication. A person may show clear signs of interest and connection, only to retreat when the relationship begins to require emotional exposure. This retreat is not a rejection of the other person, but a reaction to the internal pressure created by conflicting needs. The need to connect and the need to protect oneself. Because these needs operate simultaneously, behavior becomes difficult to interpret from an external perspective. The masking effect is reinforced by the fact that vulnerability challenges one's self-concept. To admit strong feelings may conflict with an identity built on independence, control, or emotional restraint. As a result, the individual unconsciously suppresses outward expressions of attachment to maintain that identity, even while the underlying emotional bond remains active and influential. The unconscious mind drives actions. The conscious mind resists because a significant portion of human cognition operates outside deliberate awareness, shaped by prior experiences, emotional conditioning, and implicit beliefs. While the conscious mind is responsible for deliberate thought, reasoning, and decision-making, it represents only a limited layer of the overall psyche. Beneath it, the unconscious continuously processes information and generates impulses that influence perception and behavior without requiring conscious approval. When there is alignment between these layers, behavior appears consistent and intentional. However, when the unconscious contains unresolved conflicts, fears, or internalized patterns that contradict conscious goals, it begins to override or disrupt those goals. A person may consciously decide to pursue connection, express affection, or maintain stability, yet unconsciously associate those actions with risk or discomfort. This creates resistance that manifests not as a clear decision, but as hesitation, avoidance, or contradictory actions. The mechanism behind this influence lies in emotional memory and conditioning. Experiences that carry strong emotional weight are stored in a way that prioritizes future protection. The unconscious uses these stored patterns to anticipate potential outcomes and trigger responses aimed at minimizing perceived threat. These responses are automatic and often faster than conscious reasoning, which means behavior can shift before the individual has time to rationally evaluate the situation. As a result, actions may seem inconsistent or irrational even to the person exhibiting them. They might feel a genuine desire to act in one way while repeatedly behaving in another, creating a sense of internal conflict. This is not a failure of intention, but a reflection of competing psychological forces where unconscious material exerts influence until it is recognized and integrated into conscious awareness. Desire and avoidance can coexist in the same person because the psyche is structured to pursue reward while simultaneously protecting against perceived threat. And these two systems can become activated by the same stimulus. When someone develops a strong attraction or emotional bond, the experience activates desire through anticipation of connection, meaning, and fulfillment. At the same time, if past experiences or internal beliefs associate closeness with risk, such as rejection, loss of autonomy, or emotional pain, the avoidance system is triggered in parallel. This dual activation creates a push-pull dynamic in which the individual feels compelled to move toward the source of desire while also experiencing an equally strong impulse to withdraw. These impulses are not sequential but simultaneous, leading to oscillating behavior that appears inconsistent. One moment reflects the motivational drive toward connection, while the next reflects the protective mechanism designed to prevent discomfort or vulnerability. The coexistence is reinforced by how the brain evaluates emotional significance. The more important or meaningful a connection feels, the higher the perceived stakes. Increased importance amplifies both desire and fear, intensifying the internal conflict. As a result, the individual may approach when the pull of desire becomes dominant, seeking closeness or engagement, and then retreat when the awareness of potential risk becomes more salient. This pattern is often unconscious, meaning the person may not fully understand why their behavior shifts. They may interpret their own actions as confusion or uncertainty, when in reality they are navigating competing internal drives that have not been reconciled. Without awareness and integration, neither system fully overrides the other, leading to repeated cycles of engagement and withdrawal that reflect the ongoing tension between wanting connection and needing protection. Past wounds shape present emotional responses because the psyche does not process experiences as isolated events. It encodes them as emotional patterns that influence future perception and behavior. When a person has experienced rejection, abandonment, betrayal, or emotional neglect, those experiences are stored not just as memories, but as implicit expectations about relationships. These expectations operate beneath conscious awareness and become reference points for interpreting new situations. As a result, present interactions are often filtered through the emotional residue of the past. Even when a current situation is objectively different, the nervous system may respond as if earlier threats are repeating. This happens because the brain prioritizes emotional prediction over rational analysis when it comes to attachment-related experiences. If closeness once led to pain, then closeness itself may be registered as a potential warning signal, even in safe contexts. This creates a pattern where emotional reactions are amplified or distorted by history. A neutral gesture may feel loaded. A delay in communication may feel like rejection, or increased intimacy may trigger sudden withdrawal. These responses are not fully generated by the present moment, but are shaped by accumulated emotional conditioning that has not been fully integrated or resolved. The influence of past wounds also affects self-perception. If someone has repeatedly experienced emotional disappointment, they may internalize beliefs about their own worth or the reliability of others. These beliefs become part of the psychological framework through which current relationships are interpreted. Consequently, present emotional responses are not purely reactions to what is happening now, but layered responses that combine current input with unresolved emotional memory. This blending of past and present creates a continuity of emotional experience that can make it difficult to distinguish between what is real in the moment and what is being reactivated from earlier psychological imprints, leading to reactions that feel intense, automatic, and sometimes disproportionate to the situation at hand. Projection distorts how love is expressed and perceived because it causes individuals to unconsciously transfer internal emotional content onto another person rather than perceiving them as they are in reality. In psychological terms, projection is not a deliberate act, but an automatic mechanism through which the mind externalizes unresolved feelings, desires, fears, or unmet needs. When someone experiences strong emotional attachment, particularly in the presence of uncertainty or inner conflict, projection becomes more active as the mind attempts to organize complex internal states by attributing them to an external figure. In the context of love, this means that the emotional significance a person feels is not always directed toward the other person in a fully accurate way. Instead, aspects of their own unconscious, such as idealized expectations, unresolved emotional hunger, or unacknowledged fears, become intertwined with their perception of the loved one. The other person is then partially experienced through this internal lens, which can amplify attraction, create confusion, or generate emotional intensity that exceeds the actual dynamics of the relationship. This distortion also affects expression. A person may behave in ways that are influenced more by their internal projections than by the reality of the relationship. For example, they may withdraw not because of the other person's actions, but because of internal fears they have projected onto the interaction. Similarly, they may feel overwhelming closeness or significance in moments where the connection itself has not objectively changed, because internal emotional content is being activated and misattributed externally. On the receiving side, this creates misunderstanding, as the other person is not interacting with a neutral perception, but with a psychologically constructed version of themselves. Over time, this can lead to cycles of idealization and disillusionment, where feelings fluctuate not due to changes in the actual relationship, but due to shifts in internal psychological projections that are being placed onto the experience of love itself. Silence carries more truth than words because verbal expression is often filtered through conscious control, social conditioning, and emotional self-protection, while silence reveals the underlying state of the psyche with far less distortion. When a person speaks, they can construct meaning, adjust tone, and choose language that aligns with how they wish to be perceived. But when they are silent, especially in emotionally charged situations, what remains is not performance, but presence. And that presence often reflects internal psychological reality more accurately than speech. In emotional relationships, silence frequently emerges when internal conflict is too complex to articulate. A person may feel deep attachment, fear, confusion, and resistance simultaneously, and language becomes insufficient to hold these competing states. Instead of resolving the tension through expression, the psyche defaults to withdrawal from verbalization. This silence is not empty. It is dense with unprocessed emotion that has not yet found a coherent form. Silence also exposes avoidance patterns. When someone cannot confront a feeling directly, they may choose not to speak in order to prevent exposure of vulnerability or contradiction. In this sense, silence becomes a defense mechanism that preserves internal equilibrium while concealing emotional instability. However, this concealment does not eliminate the underlying state. It simply removes its verbal representation. At the same time, silence can reveal authenticity because it removes the possibility of constructed narratives. Without words shaping perception, emotional energy becomes more noticeable through behavior, timing, and presence. Subtle shifts in engagement, attention, or distance often communicate more accurately than spoken explanations, especially when the individual themselves is not fully aware of their internal dynamics. This is why silence can feel more truthful than speech. It reflects what is not yet integrated, what is being resisted, or what cannot be fully acknowledged. In relationships marked by emotional complexity, silence often becomes the most direct expression of the internal psychological state that words are unable or unwilling to carry effectively. Emotional tension builds when feelings are not integrated, because the psyche is designed to seek coherence between what is experienced internally and what is expressed externally. When an emotion is acknowledged, understood, and processed, it is metabolized into psychological structure and loses its disruptive intensity. However, when emotions unprocessed unprocessed or partially acknowledged, they do not disappear. Instead, they accumulate internal pressure. Integration means allowing different emotional components to exist within a unified awareness. For example, love accompanied by fear or desire accompanied by hesitation must be consciously recognized as part of the same internal experience. When this does not happen, the mind fragments the experience into separate, often conflicting parts. One part may pursue connection while another resists it. And because these parts are not reconciled, they begin to generate continuous internal friction. This friction manifests as emotional tension, which gradually intensifies over time. The reason is that unresolved emotional content seeks resolution by repeatedly surfacing in thought, sensation, and behavior. The psyche attempts to restore balance by bringing attention to what has been excluded from conscious acknowledgement. If this process is resisted or ignored, the pressure increases because the underlying emotional charge remains active without discharge or integration. As tension builds, it often appears externally as inconsistency, irritability, withdrawal, or heightened sensitivity. Internally, the individual may experience restlessness or confusion, not because new emotions are being created, but because existing emotions are unable to find a stable psychological position. The lack of integration prevents emotional energy from settling into clarity. Over time, this sustained tension can influence perception itself, making situations feel more charged or significant than they objectively are. The mind begins to interpret neutral events through the lens of unresolved emotional weight, reinforcing the cycle. Without integration, emotional states do not resolve naturally, but persist as ongoing internal dynamics that continuously shape thought, reaction, and behavior in subtle but persistent ways. Inconsistent behavior often signals inner psychological division, because when the psyche is not unified, different internal systems begin to influence behavior in alternating ways. A person is not governed by a single continuous motive, but by multiple layers of consciousness, including rational thought, emotional memory, instinctual responses, and unconscious defenses. When these layers are aligned, behavior appears stable and predictable. When they are not, the result is fluctuation. Inner psychological division occurs when conflicting emotional states coexist without resolution. For example, a person may simultaneously experience attachment and fear, attraction and resistance, or desire for closeness and need for distance. These opposing states are not automatically integrated into a coherent whole. Instead, they take turns influencing behavior depending on which internal force becomes dominant in a given moment. This creates shifts in action that appear inconsistent from an external perspective. The inconsistency is not random. It reflects the internal competition between these psychological forces. When emotional connection becomes more salient, the individual may move toward engagement, communication, or closeness. When fear, doubt, or internal resistance becomes more activated, the same individual may withdraw, become distant, or reduce emotional expression. These shifts are often rapid and context-dependent because the underlying conflict remains unresolved. This division is frequently reinforced by unconscious material that has not been consciously integrated. Past experiences, emotional wounds, and internalized beliefs may activate protective responses that override current intentions. As a result, the person may not fully understand why their behavior changes, because the decision-making process is distributed across conscious and unconscious levels that are not in agreement. In essence, inconsistent behavior is not simply a matter of unpredictability, but a visible expression of internal fragmentation. It reveals that the individual is operating from multiple competing psychological positions rather than a single unified sense of emotional direction, leading to actions that shift as different internal states temporarily gain dominance over behavior without full conscious coordination or awareness of the underlying conflict structure. Love becomes complicated when identity is unstable because emotional expression depends heavily on how a person defines themselves internally. Identity provides psychological continuity, meaning it organizes how someone interprets their emotions, makes decisions, and relates to others. When this structure is stable, feelings such as love can be experienced and expressed in a relatively coherent and consistent way. However, when identity is fragmented or uncertain, emotional experiences become difficult to integrate into a single, unified narrative of the self. An unstable identity often results from shifting self-perceptions, unresolved internal conflicts, or reliance on external validation for self-definition. In such cases, a person may not have a consistent internal reference point for who they are in relation to others. This lack of internal stability affects how emotions are processed. Love, which requires openness and self-recognition, becomes entangled with uncertainty about one's own emotional needs, boundaries, and capacity for vulnerability. When identity is unstable, emotional responses tend to fluctuate because they are influenced by situational states rather than a consistent inner framework. At one moment, the person may identify with closeness and emotional availability, and at another, with detachment or self-protection. These shifting self-states create inconsistency in how love is experienced and expressed, making relationships feel unpredictable or confusing. This instability also affects perception of the other person. Without a stable sense of self, it becomes harder to differentiate between internal emotional reactions and external reality. Feelings of love may be amplified, diminished, or distorted depending on which internal state is dominant at the time. As a result, the experience of love is not grounded in a steady psychological identity, but is constantly reshaped by internal fluctuations. Ultimately, when identity lacks coherence, emotional attachment cannot settle into clarity. Love becomes layered with uncertainty, not because the feeling itself is absent or false, but because the internal structure required to hold and sustain it consistently is not firmly established, leading to complexity in both perception and expression of emotional connection. Resolution requires awareness, not force, because psychological conflicts are not mechanical problems that can be solved through pressure, suppression, or external control. When internal contradictions exist, such as love mixed with fear or desire mixed with avoidance, applying force only increases resistance within the psyche. The mind does not integrate under coercion. It fragments further when pushed, because the conflicting parts remain unacknowledged and therefore continue to operate independently beneath conscious intent. Awareness, in contrast, introduces a different dynamic. It allows the individual to observe internal states without immediately attempting to eliminate or control them. When a person becomes aware of their emotional contradictions, those contradictions are no longer fully unconscious. They enter a shared psychological space where opposing feelings can be held simultaneously rather than oscillating in hidden conflict. This shift reduces fragmentation because it removes the need for one part of the psyche to suppress another, For example, if someone recognizes that they feel both attachment and fear, the recognition itself begins to stabilize the experience. The emotions do not immediately disappear, but they stop operating in complete opposition because they are now part of conscious awareness. This creates the possibility of integration, where the mind can begin to understand the relationship between these feelings rather than being driven by them unpredictably. Force tends to produce short-term compliance but long-term instability because it does not address the underlying structure of the conflict. Awareness, however, works by changing the relationship to the conflict itself. Instead of trying to eliminate one side of the internal tension, it allows both sides to be seen, which gradually reduces their unconscious influence. As awareness deepens, emotional reactions become less automatic and more interpretable. The individual begins to recognize patterns rather than being controlled by them. This recognition creates space between stimulus and response, and within that space, integration becomes possible. Resolution, therefore, is not the suppression of internal contradiction, but the gradual transformation of unconscious conflict into conscious understanding that no longer needs to manifest through instability or behavioral fragmentation.